All right, it is 1 p.m. We have about 44 people online here. Max, I'll leave it to you if you want to wait another minute. Otherwise, you can take control here.
Yeah, let's wait another minute just in case people are still logging on. Yeah, especially this first part in terms of launching the hub and stuff. I just want to make sure people are able to get up there. So. Alrighty, it looks like we pretty much leveled off here. Yeah, you can go ahead and get started. Alrighty. Yeah, so welcome everyone to the first day of the tutorial portion of the ARM ASR Open Science Workshop. So Adam has placed the link to the content here for the tutorials within the chat. So if everybody could go ahead and take a look at the chat, you will see the link to the page that we're looking at here. So again, as an overview, so today we'll be covering introductions. So intro to Jupyter, intro to Python, and introduction to GitHub. So this website is what's called a Jupyter book, and this is what is hosting all the content. So if we go down to day one, you'll see here on the left, let me go ahead and increase the size here. That's probably a little bit better. So you'll see on the left sidebar of the web page here, which again is linked within the chat, you'll see introductions, and that will list today's schedule as well as the content for today, which will start off with an overview of Jupyter. So see, we had a couple more people join. Again, if you follow the link there in the chat, that'll take you to this page, and we're going to go to day one, introductions, and Jupyter. So I'll just link this specific one. So the goal of this first tutorial is to get you all familiar with the Jupyter interface and specifically Jupyter Lab. And we're going to get everyone spun up onto the Jupyter Hub, which is what we will be using to execute the content for this workshop. And a reminder, you all should have, with everyone registering for the workshop, you gained access to the Jupyter Hub, which is what we will be running on. So an overview, so Jupyter Lab is a popular web interface on which users can create and write their Jupyter notebooks, as well as explore data, install software, and so on. So this section will focus on an introduction to the Jupyter Lab interface and cover some details of these Jupyter Lab notebooks. So I'll start up first with the setup, which I will show you all how to go through that process. An overview of the interface, and then we will start executing and running some of these Jupyter Lab notebooks. So you'll see here that I listed some prerequisites. This is just some helpful links to get you started, especially after this tutorial if you want to go back and go through some of this, especially like running and installing this on your own system, not necessarily on ARM resources. This will be helpful for that. So to set up, so this web page you're seeing that I linked within the chat, This is what's called a Jupyter book, which is comprised of these Jupyter notebooks. So to launch our interface within your browser, you're going to go to the top right portion. So you'll see the little spaceship near the top of your page. You're going to click on the Jupyter Hub icon here. So launch Jupyter Hub, and that will launch you into the Jupyter interface. Now, the first screen you'll see here is something that says, hey, you have to log on to your ARM compute environment. So we're going to log on with our ARM usernames, which people should do beforehand, but you all should have those ARM usernames. So we're going to log on. Mine is, I'm Grover here. Do you have a question? So you see I submitted my logon there. And my login name was Grover, and then I entered my password. And you'll see this screen that says Start My Server. So we'll click on Start My Server here. And that will give us the option to use the Open Science Workshop 2022. This is educational accounts with temporary storage for this Open Science Workshop. And we will click Start. Now what that will do is go ahead and spin up our Jupyter Lab interface on the ARM compute resources. So you'll see here now we have the interface. If we go back to the page I showed you all before, so if we go back to here, go to Jupyter Lab and click Launch Jupyter Hub again. This will go ahead and launch us into our specific notebook that we'll use first here. So it takes a little bit to go ahead and clone that in. But you'll see it goes ahead and drops us into our lab interface. Now, if you have any additional questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. I know that Monica's on there to go ahead and answer any questions that come up. And towards the end, I'll open up for questions. Also, feel free to specify within the chat if you need some one-on-one help sort of after this tutorial. So now that we are on to the Jupyter Hub here and in our Jupyter interface, you'll see that we have this notebook. So this is the same thing I was viewing on the web earlier that provides the overview of the setup. And finally, you'll see here the lab interface. So you should see all this within your browser. And this comes with the base installation of Jupyter Hub or Jupyter Lab. So towards the top of your screen, let me pull that up a little bit bigger. Towards the top of your screen here, you'll see that we have a menu bar, which contains the file menu. You can see new here if you want to create a new notebook. We can create a new launcher. We can view different notebooks. This is where the save features are at. And then also save and export features. So below the menu bar here is the workspace area. So this is where you'll see the content for the rest of this week's tutorials. So you'll see we have the Jupyter introduction, which is what I'm going over now. If you clicked on one of these other ones, it would take you to another piece of content. But this is basically a way of viewing the different content within your Jupyter Lab. The launcher. So if we click here towards the top of the screen, this launcher is what will allow you to create additional notebooks. You can open up the Visual Studio Code editor. You can go to a Python console if that's your preferred development environment, or you can go directly into a terminal, text file, or PY or Markdown file. So we click on terminal here, that would fire up this terminal, which you can see it's your basic Linux terminal here. And then on the left is also the collapsible sidebar. So you can see if we click on the little file icon here, that will take away our workspace area. We can also take a look at any open tabs that we have here within this main area. We could take a look at kernels, which are basically the where we're actually running Python, and then we can see our terminal. We also have a breakdown of the different sections of our notebook, and then finally the extensions, which we won't be worrying about. And then everything below below everything is the information bar here at the bottom. So this provides you some information about how many cores you're running on, the state of your kernel, as well as your the name of the file that you're working with. And the final area here, this main area, is where we can see our main content, which right now is the Jupyter introduction material. So let's take a look at certain aspects of this Jupyter Lab interface. So the collapsible left sidebar is open to the file browser tab at launch. So clicking this right here will collapse that in, like I mentioned before. And then also within this tab, you'll see the plus button, which allows us to create this additional launcher, which we can create a new notebook if we wanted to. So if we wanted to create a blank notebook here, we could. So next to the plus button is the new folder button, which you'll see it pops up right there. So if we wanted to create a specific folder, so let's just say we want to create a Jupyter introduction folder, that would go ahead and create a folder here. So that can be helpful if you want to add additional structure to your interface. And then we have the upload button. So that's what this little up button is. So this is where we can upload any files. So for example, if we wanted to put in the new ARM logo or something like that, we go ahead and click there, and that would upload that file here. And then finally, we have the refresh button that refreshes the browser here in case there were any updates. So below the file browser tab, so below this, we have the running tabs and kernels. So right here, so you'll see here that now we have 3 running tabs. We have the terminal that we opened up, the Jupyter introduction, as well as this new untitled notebook, which is the default name. So we'll revisit this when we actually have running kernels, but remember that these kernels are background processes. So closing a tab, like a terminal or notebook, doesn't necessarily shut down the kernel. You'll have to do that manually. So that's something good to keep in mind just when you're running a lot of things. And then we have the table of contents. So that's what this 3 lines and 3 dots is. And this is an overview of the content within your notebook. It includes the headings and subheadings used in the Markdown cells of your notebook. And Markdown is basically the text. It allows you to quickly jump between different sections of your notebook. So if you want to jump back to the beginning, we go ahead and click on Overview here. That would take us to the top of our notebook. Otherwise, we'll go back down to what we were just showing before. So we'll go back down to this left sidebar. And then last is the Extension Manager tab. This is where you can customize or enhance any part of your Jupyter Lab. We won't cover this too much in detail, but there's some really neat features here where, for example, if you wanted to add some cool dashboards or some additional features to your lab environment, this is a good place to add that.
Say, Max, we have a request in the chat on if you could use a laser pointer instead of your mouse, because it's hard to.
Oh, that's a good point.
I'm not sure if we have an option for that in Teams.
May just have to move the mouse around more slowly.
Yep.
Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, I'll move the mouse more slowly. I don't think there is a way to do that within Teams. So yeah, I will move the mouse more slowly. And if there's any other feedback, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand or throw it within the chat. And I'll try to adjust to that. Thank you so much. So let's go back to the file browser here, and this is the main thing you'll want on the left side of the screen is this file browser, just because it'll allow us to look in all these different content. So next we have the terminals. So let's go ahead and go back to the terminal that we opened up. We can go ahead and open up a new one. So if you click the plus here, you scroll down, go to the bottom of your page, and click terminal. That will launch us into this terminal. So let's try some things within this terminal. So we could try, let's go ahead and do ls, which will list our current directory. And you can see we have this ARM notebooks, which is where our content's at. If we want to make a new directory, we could use something like mkdir, which is Linux syntax for make a new directory, and we'll create this new directory called tests. So you'll see that this is a fully functioning terminal where you can move around, and we'll see typing ls, which is the list, you'll see that we have this new directory called tests. So if we go in there, we're now in the test directory. So that is a fully functioning terminal. You can go ahead and view that. And if we look back within our file viewer here on the left and go within tests, you'll see that we have this new directory here. So within the terminal window, we can go ahead and go back cd ... which will take us back out of there, and we will remove the test directory, which if we refresh here, you'll see that that is now gone. So if you're more familiar with using the terminal interface, you could definitely do that within the Jupyter Hub here. Next, we'll go ahead and go back with the running terminals and tabs kernel. Let's take a look at that. So you'll see that we have terminal 1 and terminal 2 here. If we want to close those back out, we can go ahead and click shut down all. We'll say, are you sure you want to permanently shut down all these running terminals? Go ahead and click shut down all, and that will close those down. So those are some handy tools to use on here when working with the terminal interface, and that's just one of the options that we have here. Finally, the other option we have is to use what's called the Python consoles, which is another Python interface. So this is there's only one console option right now. You can install more if you wanted to. So let's go back to our launcher, that plus button. We'll click Python 3, and you'll see that we're launched within this Python console. Something that will be helpful this week, so you'll see that we're just looking at the single tab here right now. If we actually wanted to have both the notebook and the console open at the same time, you can just drag and drop. So we'll drag this to the right side of the screen, and that will allow us to look at our notebook on the right and our console on the left. So let's go ahead and click on, so go back to this console, and you'll see that there are 3 dots here while it starts, and then finally it launches here. So let's try some stuff out. So let's try creating a variable called I. We'll say I is equal to 5. And then if we actually want to print this out, we'll do print I. You'll see that when we hit enter, it just drops us on to a new line. But if we wanted to actually run this, we'd want to hit shift enter. So if we hit shift enter here, that will run our Python code and then show the output of that cell there. So we see our first cell has I equal 5, print I, and it returns 5. In the next cell, let's go ahead and enter this. So we'll type S is equal to hello world, which is a common. Yeah.
We got some questions coming up here in chat. One of them is there a way to have plots open up as separate windows instead of inline?
Yeah. So in a similar way to the way that I pulled up this console, you can also pull up files. So let's go back. So you'll see here on the left, you'll see my ARM notebooks directory. If we go in here, go to Open Science Workshop 2022. And then if we go one step further and go to tutorials and images, we can look at all these images. So for example, if you wanted to look at the ARM logo, so you could think of this as some image that you're outputting. We can view that image. You'll see that it kind of fits awkwardly here. We can move this around, but let's say you had a script or some Jupyter notebook that you were running your code in and saving to some plot. You could basically have on one side of your screen the resultant image of your plot and the code that runs your plot and generates it on the other side. So there definitely are ways to look at both of those simultaneously. Yeah, and I encourage you all to play around with the interface here and play around with sort of moving things around. You can stack things together. You could place your workspace however you want, and then the next time you log in, it'll save your look here, which can be handy when you're working on this. Any other questions? I know you said there were a couple. Yeah,
so some are having trouble actually getting the stuff to show up on the left-hand side there. They've logged back in, logged out, logged back in, but still have that empty left sidebar. Monica or anyone else, do you know what might be causing that, or are there others having the same issue?
So the couple of people who did have that issue were able to follow the link through. In order to access this content, this is pulling it from GitHub by clicking on that link in the online textbook that Max provided. So make sure you're doing that, and then when you get through, you should see the Open Science Workshop option after logging in, and you'll have to click on that little radio button in order to say, yes, I want to access the resources affiliated with this before you start the server. If you don't see the Open Science Workshop, that means you have not been added to the necessary group to get access to that. But all of this, all of these notebooks, this wonderful materials that Max and the other instructors have put together are available on GitHub, so you're not going to lose access to it no matter what. I do want to take a moment to remind everyone that this Jupyter Hub access associated with the workshop is just temporary for the week, so it's not a permanent access to the Jupyter Hub resources on ARM, but you can apply for permanent access to the Jupyter Hub resource on ARM by applying for a research account. So I'm sure Max will give you more information on that coming up.
Yeah, and the link to that's included at the end of the content here too. So I'll make sure to cover that at the end. But yeah, so this Jupyter Hub will be using it this week. But if you're interested in actually having access after this workshop, or if you have some projects that you'd like to use it, we encourage you to submit that request. So any other technical issues people running into? No? All right, and for those who are just getting on and trying to find sort of where we're at in this notebook right now, we're currently at the consoles section.
So Max, one new question did just come up. Can you show us how to install new libraries or packages?
Yes. So currently, the way that this Jupyter Hub is set up, we already provide the environment, and that's something we've worked with the team that maintains this infrastructure on. If you actually wanted to install your own content, you would go to your launcher, go to your terminal. Let's try a refresh here. So you go to your terminal, and you could go ahead and pip install, for example, like pip install.
Are you able to share?
Oh, did it stop sharing?
Yeah.
Oh, I can see it on my end here, Max.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it should be sharing.
You probably are.
Yeah,
Linux support for Teams is lacking.
Gotcha. So if we wanted to install something, so I just showed you can do pip install, which you'll see it went ahead and installed there. Otherwise, conda install -c, conda forge, for example, act atmos, which should already be on here. But for the purpose of this week's workshop, we've already double checked, and everything you'll need for the workshop is already installed. So don't worry about that when you're going through this content. But if you wanted to add anything, for example, if you wanted to extend one of the examples and needed a separate package, you just go to the terminal and follow those steps, either pip install or conda install, and it'll work there.
And Max, you can do the installs actually in the notebook too, right?
Yeah, so I showed within the terminal here, but you could also, so for example, let's add a new cell here towards the top. Whenever you're working with commands within Jupyter Lab, you start with the exclamation point. So for example, pip install metpy or something like that. This is another way to install it directly within the notebook. So.
Thanks, Max. I think that's
Absolutely.
all. So question-wise.
Great. So let me get back to where we were at. So we were going through, we already did the terminals. And we were at the consoles. So we saw that we can do I is equal to 5, print I, and then shift enter, and that will return our print statement there. And then within the next cell, let's say it's a pretty classic example, it's hello world. So we can actually copy and paste here. So we'll say s is equal to hello world. The next line, print this f is basically a format string. So we'll say s is equal to our variable s, and we'll return s. So we see here that we have our s is equal to hello world. This is our variable, and then also it returns our print statement, which is hello world. So the first line designates a string. The second line uses that formatting to print the string, and then the final line just calls up the s variable. And the last line in the cell will always be returned its value displayed, regardless of whether you called print. So even if we did that, you'll see that if we just enter our variable and hit shift enter, you'll see that the console holds on to that variable. And so at this point, let's go ahead and close out of the console. Console is good to explore some of this, and again, it has the basic environment here. So I know that people have different preferences for where they like to run Python. I'll be covering mainly, most of our content is in the Jupyter notebooks, but if the console is your preferred interface, feel free to check that out. So let's go ahead and close this console, and we'll get to our other content here, which is the text editor. This can be helpful if you're working with text files or if you're scripting. So if you're writing Python scripts. So I'll show you all how to create a text file here. So like we did with the other ones, we click this new launcher button in the top left, that big blue button. We scroll down, and under other, you'll see text file. So let's open a text file, and like we did with the previous example, let's place this on the left side of the screen. So you'll see that we have this new file called untitled.txt, and this is just a normal text file. So let's enter in some Python code here. So we can say s is equal to hello world. Let's say print s, and then if we go to close out here, you'll see that before we close our work, you'll see that we want to save our changes. So we'll save those, and then you'll see that saves our untitled.txt here on the side. So if we click on untitled.txt here on the left, and we go to rename it, so that's left clicking on that, right clicking on that, we go to rename. We'll call this sample script.py. So now that shows up as our sample script, and at this point we can go ahead and try that out. So we'll go back to our terminal here. We go into ARM notebooks. We go to Open Science Workshop. We go to tutorials. And we will see that we have our sample script listed here. So if we actually wanted to execute the script, we could run just Python sample script, and that will return our hello world, which is our print statement. And I know I'm moving a little fast here. This is all recorded, and we'll make this available offline. But I just want to be able to touch on a few more things before we close out here. So the second part here, so we'll go ahead and run some of these Jupyter Lab notebooks. So one way is to select the file browser tab over here. to hit the new launcher and then create a new notebook. So you hit the plus here. We select the notebook here, and that will create our new notebook. So you'll see at the top of your screen here, we'll see that we have a save button here. We have an insert a new cell below, so that will add a new cell. We have a cut, so if we wanted to cut that out, we go ahead and remove that. This is a copy, so if we wanted to copy the selected cell and then paste the cell below, we can. You'll see we have the paste, so if we wanted to paste that, we can. Really, one of the more important buttons for everyone to notice is the little play button, which is to run the selected cell. So if we had this first cell, print hello world, if we click the play button up here, that would go ahead and execute that code. Now, another way we could do that is by hitting Shift Enter, which carries out the same thing. We also have the stop, so this is a way to interrupt your kernel. We have the restart kernel, so if we click that, it'll reset, and you'll notice that we go back to 1 there, and then this is restart kernel and run all cells, which is typically good to do towards the end of your workflow. And then you'll notice here that this has the drop down of what type of cell we want. So the 3 main options being code, which is the default. We can also add what's called a markdown cell. So let's create the second one. Click on the cell, select markdown. And this is basically text. So you say hello world. And that's basically the rendered text. You can add headers if you wanted to. So if we want to make this the main header, hello world, that would render that way. So, and then the last one is raw, which is usually something you don't really use too often, but it's basically just text. So the two main cell types being code and markdown. So let's put this sample notebook on the right, and we'll continue to go through these. So if you wanted to actually print some more things, so if we want to go through and print whatever 2 + 2 is, make sure that's a code cell. That would print out our result there. If we wanted to take a look at how this for loop works, which will be covering some basic Python a little bit later, but for now, just feel free to copy and paste. Go ahead and print through here. So that's going through and printing those. The last part, we'll go ahead and demonstrate how to import code that you've written in a PY file. So let's say we wanted from sample script, actually do import sample script, which is the .py file that we created before. This Jupyter notebook allows you to have these relative imports, which is a way of basically importing the .py files that you have there, which can be helpful, especially when you want to write more of your functions and that sort of thing within a .py file and use them in your Jupyter notebook. So so far we've gone ahead, we've opened up Notebook, we've taken a look at the different components here, and we've seen how we can execute these. So let's try importing a module from what's called the standard library. So we'll do import time, and let's run time.sleep. So what that'll do, it's a function that causes code to wait for 10 seconds, and then goes ahead and continues on with workflow. So this is plenty of time to notice how the cell changes in time. So we see, if we run this again, you'll see that while the code is running, it'll have this little star, and then at the end, it will output the number of basically what order it's been run in. So like I mentioned before, we have these markdown cells, which are essentially a way to write up your text. There's a markup language that allows you to format text in a plain text editor. And let's go ahead and try some of this syntax. So we'll just copy and paste this for now. So in this new cell, select markdown, and we'll say, so this hashtag or pound sign indicates a heading. So this first heading, that's the biggest. This is a heading. And some text. 2 of them basically indicates that this is a subheading, and you could do 2, 3, 4, or however many you want to use. And then we have a bulleted list indicated by the dash. So we go ahead and run that cell. You hit Shift Enter on that. It renders it. So you'll see that we have our main heading. We have a subheading with that bulleted list. We can also add, this is LaTeX type syntax. So if we wanted to add some, so we'll have to make sure that's Markdown. So you'll see we can use that LaTeX like syntax to be able to put together these equations. And then if you wanted to do that with a single line, so that was a double line here indicated by the double dollar signs. If we wanted to do a single line, you go ahead and do that too. So that can be helpful when you're writing up equations within your notebook. And then these raw cells. So you'll notice here when we run this as a raw cell, just I is equal to 8. Print I, it doesn't really do anything. It's not actually going to execute. It's a good way to use that when you don't actually want your code to execute. And then the last point here. So if you wanted to actually go through and sort of jump around a little bit, you can use your arrow keys to go up and down. If you wanted to copy, you could use the C. Quick, this is the sort of keyboard shortcut. So if you click on that cell, hit C, and the next one, V. So these are some good shortcuts you can use. This is a good thing to sort of keep in your pocket. And then we have some of these special variables. So this time, in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. I know I didn't quite get a chance to get to all this, but I encourage you to read through the rest of the content here to really take some time to test out some of this material, and I will take any questions.
All right, thanks, Max. We got about 2 minutes here, so if you have any questions, please let us know. We've been responding in the chat to things, so hopefully everyone was able to get this up and running and working.
Yeah, again, really the goal here is to get you all familiar with this interface, because we're going to be using Jupyter Hub and Jupyter Notebooks the rest of this week. If you have any other questions as we go through some of these different tutorials, feel free to reach out within the chat. We're willing to work through some of those issues and get things up and running for you.
So it does look like Josh has a question here.
Yeah, just briefly, it looks like, do we have our sort of own local areas? Like if we make a directory, does that affect everyone, or is that just like in our own little our sandbox area here?
These are your own private directories.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're good.
Great. That's what I was wondering.
As I mentioned, they are temporary, so these will be up for about a week, and then after that, you would have to apply for ARM user account to maintain it, which would be permanent storage.
Yeah, as long as that question came up. So let's say you're working on some example this week. So let's go to this Untitled 1. We wanted to save this for offline. We'd go to File, and we'd go ahead and do Download. So it'll ask if we want to download, and that'll go ahead and download it to our local machine. So if there's notebooks that you really like, or that you've gone through the exercises and commented your own code and want to have this available sort of offline, that's a good way to save your notebooks onto your local machine if you want to go back.
Great point.
Yeah. Again, if you have any questions throughout this week, feel free to reach out within the chat. I know we're going to be getting to the Python session here. But again, we're excited that everyone's participating in this. It's great to see around 60 people on here, and we're looking forward to a fun week of tutorials.
So as I guess Ken maybe brings up his screen and whatnot, Max, you'll stop sharing, but Krista has her hand up here, so maybe we can just answer one last one before, well, Ken.
Yeah. In terms of having their own area, and you say you can register, we talked about VAPs having their own notebook, and we're working on that, having a VAP for each notebook. Would someone who's already got an ARM account be able to do that on the fly? Do you see that envisioned in the future? You know, they just get on and say, I want to save it, and then they could just save it because they are registered with ARM?
In that case, I would apply for the research account request for Jupyter and then just have that available for you if if you know you're going to be a user.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, so I just dropped the link in the chat here for, oh, Monica beat me to it. So
Sorry.
The access request system there, if you need to or would like to have access to Jupyter Hub after this week, please go in and fill out a research account request. So